Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you the most thrilling, in-depth analysis of the glamorous, scandalous, and ever-twisting world of Los Angeles fashion. Today is a beautiful day to dive into the latest shocking developments that are shaking the very foundations of our favorite daytime drama. The glittering confetti has finally settled on the runway, and the blinding, chaotic flashbulbs of the international paparazzi have begun to dim. But the seismic shock waves of the Hope by Logan launch are still tearing through the very foundation of the Los Angeles fashion industry. Hope Logan Spencer, once the undisputed golden child and moral compass of Forrester Creations, has officially defected. The debut of her new collection, designed by the incredibly talented Deke Sharp, was a spectacular, undeniable triumph that completely hijacked the global media narrative. Yet, beneath the veneer of this unprecedented public victory, a dark and insidious reality is beginning to take shape, threatening to destroy everything Hope holds dear. While the fashion elite toasted to her success with overflowing flutes of expensive champagne, Hope found herself drowning in a turbulent ocean of crushing guilt and overwhelming anxiety. The image of her mother, Brooke Logan Forrester, completely shattered and devastated by the deception, was burned into her mind. Equally terrifying was the knowledge of the volcanic, unyielding rage currently emanating from Steffy Forrester Finnegan and Ridge Forrester. Hope had known that leaving Forrester Creations to start a rival line at her aunt Katie Logan's fashion house would cause friction, but she truly believed she was taking a necessary step toward creative independence and personal empowerment. She believed she was finally stepping out of the oppressive shadow cast by Steffi's relentless control. Desperate for a moment of quiet refuge away from the overwhelming celebrations and the suffocating pressure of her new reality, Hope retreated into the labyrinthine, sterile corridors of the Logan corporate offices. She needed to ground herself in the tangible reality of her work, deciding to search for some archived design materials and fabric swatches for the upcoming seasonal transition. The Logan building, heavily backed by the ruthless financial power of Bill Spencer, was a stark contrast to the history-soaked, familial warmth of Forrester Creations. Here, the walls were made of cold, transparent glass and sharp, unforgiving steel. It was an empire built on calculated risks and aggressive corporate takeovers, a fact that Hope was about to experience in the most devastating way imaginable. As she navigated the quiet hallways, her footsteps muffled by the thick, luxurious carpeting, Hope approached the heavy mahogany door of Katie's executive suite. The door was left slightly ajar, a careless mistake in an otherwise meticulously controlled environment. Hope raised her hand, fully intending to knock and perhaps share a quiet, reassuring moment with the aunt who had offered her this incredible lifeline. But before her knuckles could strike the wood, she froze. Bleeding through the narrow crack in the doorway was the hushed, sharp, and uncompromisingly authoritative voice of Katie Logan Spencer. It was a tone Hope had rarely heard directed at her, a tone devoid of familial warmth, replaced entirely by the cold, calculating cadence of a ruthless corporate titan. Hope leaned in, her heart suddenly pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She quickly realized that Katie was not speaking to a designer, a public relations representative, or even Bill Spencer. She was speaking to a senior corporate litigator. The terminology cutting through the quiet air was aggressive, clinical, and terrifyingly precise. Hope heard the words ironclad, non-compete, and perpetual exclusivity being thrown around with chilling casually. And then, the breath was completely knocked from Hope's lungs as she heard her own name pass her aunt's lips, followed by a series of legal directives that would forever alter the course of her life. Katie was explicitly ordering the lawyer to embed a series of draconian, inescapable clauses deep within the fine print of Hope's newly signed contract. The instructions were meticulous and terrifyingly thorough. Katie demanded that the legal team fortify the agreement with unprecedented punitive damages for early termination, ensuring that breaking the contract would result in total financial ruin. Furthermore, she insisted on clauses that granted Logan absolute, perpetual ownership of not just the current designs, but any intellectual property associated with the Hope brand name moving forward. It was not a standard employment contract. It was a meticulously constructed legal fortress designed to keep the occupant permanently locked inside. The true horror, however, did not lie in the financial penalties, but in the chilling, calculated motive behind them. Hope listened in paralyzed disbelief as Katie explicitly stated her ultimate goal to the attorney. Make sure the wording is so restrictive, so deeply binding, that she has no path back to Forrester Creations. Ever, Katie commanded, her voice dripping with a terrifying resolve. Katie was intentionally salting the earth between Hope and her former home. She was engineering a legal and professional barrier so massive that a return to the Forrester fold would be a literal impossibility, regardless of how much time passed or how many apologies were issued. As the phone call continued, the terrifying depth of Katie's manipulation was laid bare. This was never truly about protecting Hope's creative freedom, nor was it about nurturing her talent in a supportive environment. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare and corporate sabotage. Katie explicitly stated her desire to weaponize Hope in order to inflict maximum emotional and reputational damage on Steffy Forrester Finnegan. By forcing Hope into this aggressive, highly secretive, and blindsiding launch, hijacking the international press right out from under Eric Forrester's haute couture return, Katie knew with absolute certainty that Steffy would never, ever forgive the betrayal. Katie's strategy was as brilliant as it was malevolent. She was intentionally manufacturing a permanent, irreconcilable enmity between Hope and Steffy. If the bridge to Forrester Creations was burned to ashes and Steffy's hatred for Hope was cemented for all of eternity, Hope would be completely, utterly isolated. She would have no sanctuary, no alternative, and no backup plan. Her only option for survival in the fashion industry would be to remain entirely dependent on the Logan brand. Katie was not offering her niece a platform for independence. She was systematically cutting all of Hope's lifelines so that she would have no choice but to rely exclusively on her aunt and Bill Spencer. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, Hope experienced a visceral, physical reaction to the magnitude of the betrayal. The design portfolios and fabric swatches she had been holding suddenly felt like lead weights in her trembling hands. The air in the corridor grew impossibly thin, suffocating her as a profound, paralyzing wave of nausea washed over her. The room seemed to spin as the sickening realization of her aunt's true nature fully sank in. The woman who had wiped her tears, who had promised her a safe haven from the chaotic politics of Forrester Creations, had just calmly orchestrated her permanent professional kidnapping. The philosophical shattering of Hope's worldview was instantaneous and absolute. For weeks, she had agonized over this decision, ultimately convincing herself that she was making an empowering, independent choice to leave Steffi's shadow. She had believed she was taking control of her own destiny, standing up for her brand, and proving her worth on her own terms. Now, the devastating truth was glaringly obvious. She had merely been lured from an uncomfortable cage into a maximum security prison. Her grand declaration of independence was nothing more than a meticulously orchestrated trap, and she had walked into it willingly, blinded by the promise of creative respect. A deep, painful psychological comparison formed in Hope's mind between her two adversaries. Steffy Forrester Finnegan was undeniably a tyrant. She was aggressive, territorial, and relentlessly demanding, but Steffy was an honest tyrant. When Steffy decided to pause the Hope for the future line, she did it overtly, looking Hope directly in the eye and stating her intentions. Steffy's hostility was a known variable, a frontal assault that Hope could see coming and brace herself against. But Katie had smiled warmly. Katie had played the role of the supportive, loving aunt. Katie had offered a comforting embrace and a seemingly generous lifeline, all while secretly weaving a noose of unbreakable legal wire to slip around Hope's neck. In that heart-stopping moment, Hope realized she was nothing but a pawn, a helpless hostage caught in the crossfire of a multi-generational blood feud. The endless, toxic war between the Logans and the Forresters had consumed her mother, her aunt, and Steffy, and now it had finally come to claim her. She had always prided herself on being the peacemaker, the moral center who tried to bridge the divide between the warring families. She thought she was transcending the petty rivalries by stepping out on her own. Instead, she had become the ultimate trophy, the most devastating weapon Katie could wield to strike a lethal blow against the Forrester empire. The echoing memory of Donna Logan's desperate warnings suddenly flooded Hope's consciousness. Donna had pleaded with Katie to stop the poaching, warning her that stealing Hope away from Forrester Creations would irreparably destroy their family. Katie had dismissed those concerns, claiming it was just business and that Brooke would eventually understand. Hope now saw with terrifying clarity that Katie never cared about family harmony. She did not care about the collateral damage to Brooke's heart or the immense psychological toll this deception was taking on Hope. Katie only cared about total, humiliating victory over the Forresters, and she was willing to sacrifice her own niece's future to achieve it. The terrifying reality of Hope's isolation began to close in around her like a physical weight. Who could she possibly turn to? Her mother, Brooke, was already shattered by the lies and deception, viewing Hope's defection as an act of treason against the family legacy. Steffy and Ridge were enraged, ready to scorch the earth to protect Forrester Creations from the Logan threat, and Liam, her husband, Liam Spencer, had blindly and enthusiastically championed this move to Logan, convinced that his father and Katie were offering Hope the respect she deserved. Liam had no idea that the Spencer-Logan alliance was actually a gilded cage. Hope was entirely alone, trapped in a fortress of her aunt's making, surrounded by enemies on all sides. Slowly, carefully, Hope backed away from the slightly ajar door, terrified that even the sound of her breathing might alert Katie to her presence. She retreated into the shadows of the sleek, corporate corridor, her innocent, optimistic worldview forever destroyed. The golden girl of Los Angeles fashion, the woman who always believed in the inherent goodness of her family, was dead. In her place stood a woman who realized she had been played for a fool by her own blood. If Katie wanted to play a ruthless game of corporate chess, Hope realized she would have to learn the rules very quickly. She was legally bound, emotionally isolated, and professionally trapped, but she was no longer blind. The war had just escalated to a terrifying new level, and Hope Logan Spencer was going to have to become a master strategist herself if she ever hoped to survive the traps set by her own family.